Welcome back to Memos to the President. It's really an honor for me to sit down today with my colleagues Liza and Jenilee. Welcome. It's so good to be together in this room doing this podcast with you. So the purpose of this podcast is really to talk about the memos we're going to release. There are two memos that our team did. One is on the future of the international trade order, or the techno-economic order as we call it here. And the second memo is really talking about the department that is really at the center of this, which is the Department of Commerce, and how Department of Commerce should organize for this competition. But before we talk about the memo, you both spent time working at the federal government, different places. And so I wanted to hear a little bit about you, your story, how you got here, what did you do before you got here? Let's start with you, Liza.
Thanks. So I came into the national security space sort of indirectly. When I was a young person, I got the opportunity to live and work and study in China. So I got really invested in the Chinese language. This was at an earlier, more friendly time in U.S.-China relations. So I kind of fell in love with the country and the people. But then when I was out of grad school and looking for a job, I ended up at the CIA as a China analyst. That was just where I could use my China expertise. From there, I spent some time out at US Indo-PACOM working with the military, also advising on China. And then I got the opportunity to work at the National Security Council. You and I didn't overlap, but that's when I met Illy. And he kind of gave me some advice to get started at the NSC. I stayed on into the Biden administration. And then when I was thinking about what to do after government, I came back to you and you offered me a job at SCSP. So
I'm glad you said yes, Liza. Jenilee, you come from other departments, but do you want to talk a little bit about your background and how you got to where you are now?
Absolutely. So I spent 16 years in federal government, and 8 of those were being employed by the Department of Commerce. But I came to Commerce after working on the Hill and in a regulatory agency. So I've been able to see different parts of the government community. And one thread that kind of ran through all of that is technology. It happened accidentally, but it's something that I have grown to learn more and more about over the years and love and really care about. So got to come to SCSP because of that. I had a detour to the NSCAI. That's how we met, Illy. Yeah. And you brought me here.
Yeah.
You got me to leave government.
No, we all left almost at the same time. So I'm glad we did. And I'm glad we were doing what we're doing. So let's talk a little bit about the memo, Liza. Let me start generally first with Liza and talk about the techno-economic order that I think has been evolving for a couple of years, Liza, and just your observation about how we got here and why are we here. I mean, we talk a lot about this, but I think you have a really good description of where we started with China and how we ended up where we are right now.
Yeah, I mean, the incoming Trump administration is facing this kind of confluence of a couple of really big shifts that are coming together. And one, of course, is the rise of China and the axis of disruptors, as we call them, China and its kind of little brother disruptor states, Russia, Iran, North Korea, that have really been putting stress on the international system for a long time, but it's really coming to a head. And then on the other hand, there's technology, SCSP's whole reason for being, and particularly AI. The changes are really speeding up. And so there's this interesting way that these two mega trends are coming together and creating a lot of challenges that the incoming administration, as well as the Department of Commerce and others, will have to meet, but also a lot of opportunities. So I think we're really excited about some of the changes AI will bring and some of the ways that opens up new pathways for strengthening American leadership and dominance in the midst of these challenges.
And generally, you've been at Commerce, and we have seen the role of Commerce evolve over time, especially in this administration. We see the role of BIS being more important than ever probably in our history before. Can you just talk a little bit about how DOC evolved over time while you were there and, in the last 4 years before we get into how the future of DOC should look like?
Sure, absolutely. So right now, as you said, commerce really is at the center of the techno-economic competition, but that really wasn't always the case. Commerce has all these different, seems like disparate orgs that focus on everything from fisheries to the census to standards. And there really wasn't that through line that was pulling everything together while all the bureaus were working really hard to achieve their particular mission, there wasn't this cohesive drive or mission towards how do we help our nation help our economy, and how do we tie that to national security. And that's something that I've seen really shift over the years. And one great example is the Economic Development Administration has been working on regional development for decades, but now there's a focus on regional development with a tech and national security spin. If you told me that when I started at DOC, 10 plus years ago, I never would have believed you. So that is a huge shift in its mission and the culture.
Right. Liza, let's talk a little bit about the memo. So you have some clear objectives of where do you think the techno-economic order is going, and what our national security interests should be. Can you expand a little bit about the objectives and the purpose of the memo?
Sure. Yeah, we really wanted to go back over SCSP's work over the last couple of years, as well as some new ideas we've had lately as we've looked at the trends in AI, and come up with what we thought were some really key things that the incoming administration should consider. And so there's three buckets, really. One is promote, one is protect, and one is, pushback or pooling. So promote is, that's obvious. That's how do we run faster at home? And there we're really talking about how do we take what we think is an American edge in things like AI and cloud computing and financial technologies or fintech and double down on that and really make sure that we are lengthening that lead ahead of China so that we secure it and make sure that's permanent. The pushback side is really how do we move beyond these kind of narrowly focused things that we're doing in export controls and bring in our allies and partners and make sure that those pushback and protect measures are something that are more than just an American thing, but bringing in our key allies who also have some key strengths in technology. And then pooling is just sort of how I summarize this idea of combining markets and capital and technology lists with key allies so that we can strengthen our leverage. The U.S. is big. We have a lot of leverage on our own, but we're a lot stronger. And sometimes we can only do things if we pull in other democratic market economies.
And you have a couple of examples, I think, in each of these categories of what we should do. Can you give me just one example per each category of what are some of the concrete things I think the Trump administration should do in order to really what I think is being redefined as the new techno-economic order, globally, that, the markets are going to shift. I think the countries are going to shift based on this. And so what are some of those things that you said under the protect and promote and pull as a clear example that they should undertake right away?
Sure. Yeah. I think one under promote is really thinking back to the time when we were all in government and we were kind of fighting these battles against Huawei, 5G, and what we found was the U.S. just didn't have an exportable option to say, use the American alternative to build your 5G. And so countries were stuck with Huawei. So now I think when we think about where we want to lead diplomatically and where we want to compete, we have to think about our strengths. And those are cloud computing. We're by far and away the leading cloud provider. And then some other areas of AI and fintech. We're the global financial superpower. So we say we should have a diplomatic agenda to go out and promote these U.S. advantages instead of kind of hanging back and just letting the private sector do it on its own.
And this is one of the things we talked with Joe yesterday about using diplomatic tools to really push for our, capabilities and I think our platforms.
And then on the domestic side, in order to be able to keep doing that, we propose something that we call a data center dominance initiative. And that's just about making sure we're investing in data centers here, clearing up permitting hurdles, making sure that we're meeting the energy demands. I think you've heard from both the Biden and the Trump teams that we need to be doing more here. So there's a real bipartisan consensus on the promote side.
We saw the EO release today.
Right.
And the OpenAI piece. On Monday, their economic policy paper, I think that was released.
Right. Yeah, there's a lot of good momentum. And of course, at SCSP, we're all about trying to connect those dots and make sure that the private sector is connecting with the right parts of government so they can be working together. Because our strengths are in the private sector, but the government has that convening function that can kind of help connect the dots.
Thank you. Generally, let's talk about Department of Commerce. I feel like as somebody that has spent years working in the Department of Defense, there are always, next year's Armed Services Committee bills that talk about restructuring, reforming DoD, but you don't get a lot on the DOC side. And so I view DOC as one of the most departments in town because of the competition with China. And I think they have been at the forefront of this competition for the last couple of years. But are they structured and organized for this competition? And if not, what would be our recommendation to restructure DOC going forward?
So DOC is an older department and obviously could improve from some reorganization. And we do have a couple of recommendations in our latest memos. One is focused on manufacturing. There are manufacturing leadership in multiple bureaus within DOC. They should be pulled together and work together. So NIST, BIS, ITA all have manufacturing functions, but they're not connected in the same way. So that's one thing that we're recommending, to make sure that they work together. There's also a recommendation to make sure that our folks who are traveling abroad, who are at the tip of the spear in our commercial diplomacy, are connected to the other people working on the same issues. So ensuring that your folks who are IP attaches or are working for ITA, they are working together. So I think that there are some structural things that can change to just make sure that the missions within the different bureaus are tied together better.
No, absolutely. And Liza, from your time at the White House, you must have felt this responsibility that it's on DOC, but there is usually, it's followed by lack of resources, lack of people to execute this mission. So from your perspective, based on the jobs you've had in the past, what would you see as Department of Commerce being that robust department that has everything to execute its mission?
Yeah, honestly, traveling around the world when I was in government, and I'm sure you both have had this experience, you often meet counterparts who are from a digital ministry or Ministry of Innovation or a Department of Technology. You look around the U.S. government, there's no such agency. There's no digital department. So should we create one? Do we need a digital department in the age of AI? My own preference is no, let's not create a whole new department, whole cloth, because it's going to take years. Take years to pass the bill, much less fund it and set it up. By that time, we'll be at AGI. So it'll be a new challenge. So how do we equip the Department of Commerce we have now to meet these challenges? We have a lot of ideas in the memo, and one of them is really harnessing the power of AI to make the jobs of Commerce Department officials easier and faster and better. So we know that there's a lot of open source information that can help them track export control enforcement, that can help them track trade data, export and import data, things of this nature. And so we recommend using some of the NIST test beds and focusing on agentic AI and building fit-for-purpose AI agents to help Commerce Department officials do their job. So they would work for the humans and kind of help do a first scan of the information and then point them in the right direction. And this would be done under the supervision of a human. But we think that there's a lot of potential to enable them to do their jobs faster and better.
So Liza, you talked a little bit about the steps that the incoming administration can take in terms of promote peace, but let's talk a little bit about the pushback piece. The pushback really started with the first Trump administration, with the release of the national security strategy that, our colleagues did back in 2017. And then it continued with the Biden administration. What should be, the continuation of that? What we didn't do so far that, the next Trump administration can do?
Yeah, so on the pushback piece, we put forward a few ideas here. Clearly a lot has happened even in the last couple days. I think just yesterday, the Biden administration came out with this new AI diffusion rule, which is another really big piece of the pushback or protect agenda. And we'll see where the Trump administration goes with that. But I think we tried to take a step back and say,
and I think there's another one coming on EVs in the coming days.
Yes, the Commerce Department is finalizing its rule on connected vehicles, which, our read on that is the intent seems to be to kind of seal off the U.S. market from Chinese connected vehicles. But we tried to kind of take a step back and say, where are we with this protect and pushback agenda? I think the only way it's going to be sustainable is if we have a vision that brings in our key allies and partners. And so that's what we try to lay out. And we touch on how the U.S. Kind of regulatory approach is moving from one that's characterized by a lot of lists. And, we've sat in these meetings where the Commerce Department is deciding, are you going to list this entity? Are you going to list that entity? Sanctions lists, visa sanctions lists, DOD has a list, Treasury Department has a list, lots and lots of lists, and it kind of starts feeling whack-a-mole. But what I think you've seen emerge is a shift towards a set of rules that kind of guide companies' left and right limits of where it's safe to invest, where it's not safe to invest, where it's safe to partner or not. I think that's a good thing in a democracy, that there's a little more clarity for companies. But I think if we want to make that sustainable, there has to be more of a coherent vision and effort to bring in allies and partners, not just because it makes it feel good, but frankly, because we'll have more leverage if we're working together.
Liza, I think you're the first person I heard this argument from, and I liked it, but the whole issue of decoupling.
Right.
Because there's a lot of dilemma, I think, out there that we are decoupling from China. And I think you have said it first, that I took it and I used it in every public speech I gave or remarks, is that they started decoupling from us.
Right.
Can you just elaborate a little bit on your argument? Because I think it's spot on, but I think it gets lost in a sea of these policies and how they're depicted as an effort from us to decouple from China.
Right. Of course, the U.S. built the current international trading order, and we're the biggest promoters of free trade. And I think any economist will tell you that free trade, in theory at least, is good for everybody. It makes the pie bigger. It makes everybody richer. It makes economies benefit. It's win-win. But that's in theory. And what we see in practice is that China is distorting things. And when you have, a 200-pound bully in the schoolyard, it kind of changes the dynamic. And you
or
can't.
It doesn't play by the rules of the road.
Right, exactly. You can't just act like everyone is playing by the rules. And so it's really changed the dynamic. We know that, China, the Chinese Communist Party, for a long time has been on this drive to indigenize the production of technology and to gradually wean themselves off dependency on the West and the United States. And so they started that many years ago. And it wasn't until around 2017 or 2018 or so that the United States started responding in kind. And so I think going forward, we have to acknowledge the reality that we're in a less than ideal world, and we have to face the reality of an unfair competitor and build a new world that's characterized by free and open trade with other free people and free nations, and managed trade with the autocracies. So that doesn't mean total decoupling, cutting off everything with China. I think that's unrealistic, but I think it means strictly managing our trade and economic relations so that we're diversifying away from dependencies in areas that really matter for our security and our daily lives.
Yeah, no, I agree. And generally, I think a big shift that has happened in our landscape is sort of like this relationship between private and public sector. Just because when you face a challenger like China that has a civil fusion, heavy subsidized companies that can go and deploy, their technologies globally, you need a new relationship between the private sector and public sector. And I think commerce really sits at the nexus of those two communities. So can you talk from your observation of how that has evolved over time? Is it better? Is it not good? What can we do more to just really bring those two communities together?
Absolutely. So commerce, it's really in commerce's DNA to work with the business community. It's part of the mission to promote U.S. business domestically and abroad. And so there is a natural working relationship with industry. And that is really seen at NIST. I'm a little biased. I worked at NIST, but that's part of what they do every single day is they build public-private partnerships with all of their multi-stakeholder engagements. And why this is critically important is really in the standards development world If NIST can meet with industry and build coalitions, create frameworks on particular subject matter areas or technical areas, and then bring that to standards development organizations, they're able to bring the US perspective, a coalition perspective, to those standards groups and ensure that our values, our technology are built in to the standards that companies have to use everywhere. So that's a perfect example, but extends beyond NIST. We're seeing better public-private partnership at EDA. We're seeing it at ITA, just ensuring that business is playing a great role in promoting the U.S.
All right, Jenilee, let me start with you. In ideal world, what would be some of the reforms you would like to see at Department of Commerce?
So I think one of the biggest reforms would be bringing together the business functions or the business engagement functions at DOC and better connecting them with the functions outside of the department. So right now, ITA does commercial diplomacy, but that is not linked as well as it could be with the work of USTR. The Small Business Administration, it sits independently. That work could be better linked to the work of the Department of Commerce. So less a full shift of the federal government, I think greater coordination at the White House level and ensuring that all of these departments and agencies are working together toward the same mission is critically important to our U.S. competitiveness.
And this is a bonus question generally, but Department of Commerce is like a combination of many bureaus and many agencies. In ideal world, what doesn't belong there? In ideal world, what belongs there that is not there?
There are lots of opinions on this. I think there is one through line. At the end of the day, every single department has a through line to promoting U.S. commerce. And so even if you look at EDA, they're promoting U.S. commerce by helping with economic development. If you're looking at BIS, they're using export controls to help protect U.S. businesses. So there is that through line, but I do think there could be some better coordination and streamlining to ensure that the functions there can focus on what the U.S. needs to improve its economy and national security.
And Liza, I think one of the toughest questions that I'm asked sometimes to answer, or I don't see it being answered, is what is our end goal with our relationship with China? What is the end objective to this, to our policies, to our behavior, to their policies and to their behavior?
Yeah, it is a tough question. Americans are an optimistic bunch, and we always like to hold out hope that anyone can change. And we saw that with a relationship with Japan that went from an enemy to one of our best friends in the world. And so we like to hold out hope with China. I think that's a good thing. I think we have to distinguish between long-term hopes and objectives and then the short-term reality. So the short-term reality is that we're locked in a systemic rivalry, a strategic competition, and we have to fight like hell. And we have to do everything we can, promote, protect, pool. We have to do all of it, and we have to bring in our allies. And that's going to be rough at times. But over the long term, I think we have to remember that China has a long history. It's had many regimes over the years. It's gone through evolutionary and revolutionary change many times. And over the long term, we have to hold out hope that we can have a relationship with China that is free, peaceful, and prosperous. And if China over the very long term can be like that, then I think we could have a great relationship.
And what do you
we
think
should
are
always,
their
we should
objectives
not,
and policies,
I think
Liza?
we should never hesitate to speak publicly about imagining that future for China, a future for the Chinese people that is free, that is peaceful, and that is prosperous. And that's a China that's great for the Chinese people, it's great for Americans, and it's great for the world.
But my second part of the question was, what are their objectives and their goals?
They want to
Right now.
dominate. Yeah, I mean, China is very clear. The Chinese Communist Party is very clear. They want to ensure that China leads the world in terms of comprehensive national power. That's military, that's economic, that's political, that's cultural, that's technological. It's defining the rules of the road. And so that means that they are going to be displacing the things that Americans hold dear, our global alliances, our financial and economic leadership, our military superpower. All of that has to be put in second place or worse in order to accommodate what Beijing envisions for itself.
Right. Thank you. I like to end every conversation with a question. We have a lot of young people here that join us from across the nation, from their universities, as research assistants, interns, and I think our goal really is to encourage them and then to inspire them to serve in any of the departments and agencies in town. So, if you would say one thing about why is that good, why is it serving in anywhere in DC, whether it's departments or agencies, White House, DoD, CIA, why is that encouraging for anybody listening to this or watching this? You're in grad school, you're debating whether or not you want to move to DC, but what would be one advice you would give them? Let's start with Jenilee first.
I think it's all about following the mission. The whole point of working for the federal government is to help the American people. And so you get to go to work every single day and know that no matter what job you're doing, whether it's scheduling a meeting or briefing the president, that you are helping the American people. And there's nothing more gratifying than having a job like that. And I hope that everyone could have that experience in their professional career. I know it's been personally gratifying for me.
I couldn't have said that better. I completely agree. And there's nothing more motivating than having a mission and being able to get up in the morning and know you're working for something bigger than yourself, bigger than the bottom line of a company. I guess the one piece of advice I would say is to invest in your own expertise and read books. We are living in an amazing information age. We have at our fingertips AI, YouTube videos, podcasts, blogs, everything. It's all available like right in our smartphones. We can learn anything. And I would just say, in addition to all that, keep reading books so that you can learn from the minds of great people who've lived great lives. And I think there's something about a book actually following a sustained story, argument, narrative over, and kind of learning to invest in that deep thinking will take you far.
Liza and Jenilee, thank you so much for being my guest today. Thank you all for watching. Until next time.